The Moriori are the ethnic Polynesian people indigenous to the Chatham and Pitt Islands of New Zealand. They are often misrepresented as Maori, who are also ethnically Polynesian but are indigenous to mainland New Zealand. The last known full-blooded Moriori died in 1933. The Moriori are ethnically Polynesian, Polynesia being a collection of more than 1,000 islands in the central and southern Pacific Ocean. It is thought, and often taught in schools, that ancestral Moriori were Maoris who emigrated to the Chatham Islands from mainland New Zealand around the 16th century. However, Moriori descendants call this a myth. They maintain that their ancestors, the Tuakana, arrived on the islands directly from eastern Polynesia, being joined later by the Kahu, Moe, and Waka from the New Zealand mainland. The Chatham Islands proved an unsuitable location for the cultivation of most crops known to the Polynesians, so the Moriori adopted a hunter-gatherer lifestyle. Food was almost entirely marine-sourced, including fish, fur seals, and seabirds. The islands could only comfortably maintain a population of around 2,000 people, so they would castrate some of the male infants in order to control the population growth. The Moriori embraced a pacifist culture, where they followed Nanuku's law, which avoided warfare and banned cannibalism, a practice that was not uncommon amongst Polynesians of the time. Instead, they employed dispute resolution in the form of ritual fighting and conciliation. However, this pacifist ethos would lead to their later destruction at the hands of the invading North Island Maori forces. The first Europeans to make contact with the Moriori were the crew of the HMS Chatham in 1791. The British ship arrived on the island by accident, but still claimed it on behalf of the Crown. According to the ship's log, the Moriori advanced hastily and by their threats and gestures plainly indicated their hostile intentions. The British gave them an offering of helmets, beads and red cloth in the hopes that they would be given food and water. However, during a miscommunication, a Moriori man who was defending his fishing nets was shot and killed. Both the diary of the ship's captain and local oral tradition record that both sides regretted the incident and felt that they had overreacted. Moriori elders felt that Nanuku's law had been dishonoured in the exchange and devised a peaceful ritual for greeting visitors in future. In the coming years, the Moriori developed a reputation amongst the Europeans for being very friendly. Sealers and whalers would spend months at a time on the islands. While this was peaceful, the Europeans were quickly depleting the population of seals that the Moriori ate, made clothes from, and had a religious significance to them. The Europeans introduced pigs and potatoes to the island to supplement the seals they were hunting, however they also brought infectious diseases with them. In around the mid-1830s, around 10 to 20% of the Moriori population died from diseases like influenza. In 1835, the Moriori Islands were invaded by two Maori tribes, the Ngati Tama and the Ngati Matunga. They had hijacked a British ship and sailed over to the Chatham Islands. It is said that as the Maori landed on the beaches of Chatham, they found and killed a 12-year-old girl, flayed her, and displayed her flesh on posts in order to strike fear in the Moriori. One ritual killing included the staking out of women and children on the beach and leaving them to die in great pain over several days. They also forced Moriori to desecrate their own sacred sites by urinating and defecating on them. Despite the onslaught from the Maori, the Moriori elders forbade retaliation as this was not in line with Nanuku's code for non-violence and passive resistance. From 1835 to 1866, the Maori forced the Moriori to labour as slaves, slaughtered them, and even cannibalised them. By 1870, their population had dwindled from just under 2,000 to 100 people. At the time, New Zealand was being colonised by the British. However, the Crown made no attempts to stop the violence. One Moriori elder wrote to the Governor-General petitioning him for justice, emancipation, and restoration of their land rights. Instead, the Crown ruled in favour of the Maori, determining that the Moriori had been conquered. They also officially gave land rights to the Ngati Matunga Maori. The Moriori were released from slavery by the Maori at the end of the 1860s. Their small population gradually led to a dilution of their culture, with only a handful of men still understanding the Moriori language and culture from before the invasion. The younger generation, many of whom now had Maori fathers, spoke Maori while still identifying themselves as Moriori. In the 2006 census of New Zealand, 945 people said that they were of Moriori descent, and today there are several thousand of mixed Moriori ancestry. In 2001, the Moriori received a $6 million grant from the New Zealand government to preserve their culture and language. In 2002, land on the east coast of Chatham Island was purchased by the Crown and is now a reserve and jointly managed by both the Moriori and the Crown. In 2020, the New Zealand Minister for Treaty of Waitangi negotiations said that the Crown failed to protect the Moriori from the Maori and failed to prevent myths being spread about their race being lost. For this reason, the New Zealand government signed a treaty with Moriori descendants. The treaty includes $18 million in compensation, a Crown apology, an agreed historical account of the Moriori, and the transfer of lands of cultural and spiritual significance to Moriori on both the Chatham and Pitt Islands. To date, neither the Ngāti Tama or the Ngāti Matunga Māori have made apologies or assisted in preservation of the Moriori culture. In fact, as recently as 2018, the Ngāti Matunga tried to block the transfer of Chatham Island land from the Crown back to the Moriori, stating that they have no right to have it exclusively, and that the Ngāti Matunga did conquer and subjugate Moriori at that time, and have maintained their mana whenua status ever since. To that, Moriori descendant Maui Solomon says that if his people had fought back and lost, then he could accept that they had been conquered. However, his people chose not to fight.